come to Fruita at 3 months old by train. I was adopted. I was loaded on a train in Denver and picked up by my folks in the Fruita Depot, which was during the Depression. And nobody had any money, I guess, in them days. And plus the travel wasn't as good, so uh, that's how come I done. Nowadays that would be impossible. Uh, and I've raised in Fruita all my life. Basically, I was raised on 32 South Apple, which is at the end of McEwen and Aspen. The streets didn't go through in them days, and I can remember a lot when I was raised. I remember drinking milk out of a bottle one time. I also remember the old high school burning down in 1934. I was 4 years old, which was a half a block from where the old high school burnt down. And I'd run up there and try to watch the fire and all the fire trucks, and my mom would come up and catch me and paddle my britches on the way home. And then I'd run back there again. She'd have to catch me again. And I took a few willow switches by the time I got through with the day. And from there on, I remember the old high school. The remains was never picked up, the bricks and everything, and the old foundation laid in that same place with weeds until after the war, World War II. I also remember Brumbo's grocery store burning down, and they never cleaned up the mess there. And it used to be where the Suds is at now. That used to be an open space, and there was an open space over behind that, and all the bricks laid in that place and all the dust and dirt until after the war. And then Harry Moore come along and built a grocery store, which is now that store, and then later become Walton's grocery store, and all, well, it was also a hardware, and now it's Suds Cafe or whatever it is. But I understand it's been sold again. And then around the corner, you want that? Round the corner used to be a washateria. And then there was a guy named Joe that had a cafe, and they drafted him in the Army, and Hill's Cafe bought it, and Mrs. Hill run it until he tried to get it back from him when he got discharged, but couldn't get it. And at that time, there was a vacant lot there next to Hill's Cafe, which is now the bank. And Mrs. Hill, or no, Joe built a restaurant, tried to compete with Hill's Cafe, but it didn't work. And then there was a gas station there, which was also the Ice House, which was run by D. Smith and some other people. But the ice truck used to run through Fruita in the summertime, and all of the kids would jump in the back of it and get some licking ice, chipping ice off the ice truck. And then across the street where that new bank is was White Eagle gas station, which, as far as I remember, Ted Carrico used to have a radio. He repaired radio shops, radios and everything, while he also had a gas station. And I remember when I was my dad's, we'd go down there. We didn't have no radio or anything, so we'd go down there and listen to Joe Louis fight. And I'd play the pinball machine, for nickel, if I had a nickel. And then my dad would always go to the Fruita Park, which was a lot different then than it is now. They had a raised center, which the Fruita High School band played every Saturday night, and there was a water fountain right out in the middle. And when you first come off the highway into Fruita, it was dirt road, and there was a big horse tank there where all the horses drank their water, and they had a tie down there. And I also remember all the sidewalks were wood, so there was all board sidewalks. And the water used to run, and then they put cement, and then the water used to run right down through town when it was cement, and it run over the tires that were parked, And Harry Evans at that time was a marshal. No, Parrish was a marshal, and then Harry Evans. And there was only two cops in Fruita, the night marshal and the day marshal. And how they got a hold of them, above the old Fruita drugstore was a big light that was there, which is still there if you want to look. It stands up on a pole, and when that light was red, that means call them. Because there was no telephones by then, that's how they did it. And if there was a fire in Fruita, it was 3 whistles. And when the fire was over, they blew the whistle. It was also a curfew that went blowed at 9 o'clock, and one blowed at noon. And it was pretty loud. Uh, I remember, what's there now? Anyhow, if you go down that street, like the, the the Masons owned the Fruita drugstore. They still do, I think. I've been told they do. Going down that street used to be the jailhouse, and the old parish was the cop at that time, which is down. I don't know that street. Anyhow, well now they have the street closed there, and there's chairs and stuff out there. But the jailhouse used to be there, and then it later become the kindergarten for Fruita. And Clarence Smith had a blacksmith shop there then. And I also remember the first time I was very old, and I wanted to see that jail, and they put me in there, and I started crying. I thought, boy, I didn't like that. uh, that's some of the things that I remember. Okay. I also remember riding my little tricycle down in front of the old city hall, which is the city hall now. That was about the only street that had a cement sidewalk. And I'm wheeling down there, and I had a crooked wheel, and run off in the ditch, and I started crying about that. And the first grocery store at that time was the 2 grocery stores was Goodell and Barnes, and the next building, the first one Goodell and then Barnes, and the next one used to be a big garage, and they sold tractors, which was owned at that time by the Osborns. Okay, and then the next building would be the movie theater, which I used to go to the movies all the time. And the next one would be the post office next to it. The next one would be Osborne had a hardware store there. And then it was a barber shop next. And then the Fruita Drug. And across the street was where that Suds is at now. But then it was a vacant lot. And then the Fruita State Bank was there, which was not open, and it was run by Belden as they sold clothing. There's a clothing store, and on one end was owned by Huntley's, and that was during when I was about 15. And to get Levi's, you had to go on a special order, and they were $2.35 a pair, but you had to order them. And then around the corner was that vacant lot where all them bricks were still hanging out, where Brumbaugh's grocery store burnt down, which was never cleaned up till after the war. And then I went to where that other part was. And then you go back across the street from where the Fruita State Bank used to be, would be Miller's gas station, which is now, I don't know what it is now, but it was a gas station. And then Greyhound bus used to pick the people who wanted to get a bus ticket. The office was there. And then where there was a vacant lot during World War II that had everybody's name that was in the Army, where they were at, if they was overseas, if they were wounded, or all the details. If they were dead, they had a different mark. Nobody knows what happened to that sign. Next one would be one of the banks at the time, before they went broke. And all the banks in Fruita, there was none in Fruita when I grew up until I was a senior in high school, or maybe a little after that. And then across the street used to be the cash and carry grocery store, which is now a bicycle shop. And the next building was Dr. White's office, which Dr. Shellerly was there. And then it became Dr. Husky's office. And now it's Camillo's, and I don't know what it is now. And then the next place was the horse, Max Fromm, made harnesses and stuff for all the farmers and everything. But it was a leather set, and you get your shoes half soled too. And then the next thing was where the telephone office was, where all the telephone operators used to number plates. Everything was by number. And if you had a phone around the country, you were lucky to get a hold of them. There were so many rings. Everybody was on the same line. Next spot was a vacant lot, which one of the Osborns had a tractor, used to sell tractors. That was a vacant lot, which is now, it become a drugstore and now it's Kim's Auto Parts, and the next building was a big gas station, which was called Skillet Gas Station, and Jake Steele run it as the first guy that I remember that was running it. And no, I'm sorry, Torque got by number Torking to run, and then Jake Steele, and then Tompkins run it, Earl Tompkins, and then Frosty Tompkins, and then finally it was tore down. Now it's a vacant lot, our parking lot. Down the street was Assembly of God Church, you know, and then from then on was across the street was the school grounds where the grade school was, which I was the first grade student to go in that with their still license plates. It was built in 1936, and I was the first first grader in that building when the ends were put on. And then up above this first grade was eighth grades, and then they built another addition on that was north end, which was the fifth grade and the fourth and fifth grades, and then the Fruita High School, which was built at the same time, 1936, which was one of the best high schools in the West built buildings, and still is, but it's now sold, I understand, and not using it anymore, effective this year. And I don't know what they're going to do with it. I have not heard. And I went through high school all the way through there. I played sports, and I'm in the Hall of Fame for sports. And I graduated in 1948, but I can name pretty near everybody who graduated from that place. And I played basketball, I was captain of the basketball team, but they didn't have wrestling or baseball at that time. And later on, Fruita became a powerhouse in wrestling and also baseball. And now they're one of the biggest schools in the valley. And when I graduated, there was 58 students. And my daughter graduated in 1982, and she played on the state championship, first state championship team of Fruita, which was girls. And she's in the Hall of Fame for basketball. And
what did you do for fun as a teenager in Fruita?
I was in the Boy Scouts, and the old armory was over there, and it was open for kids to go play basketball in a big gymnasium. And it later became the City Hall of Fruita, and where people used to get their water for all of the systems, because the water lines were out, so all the farmers had systems. And boy, it'd be a slick spot over there where in the wintertime, it was free, you didn't dare walk by there. And then the jail was moved there. And at that time, I happened to be on the fire department, and since my body shop, which I have owned for 63 years and still do, was close to that damn fire truck, which was parked right there. So every time they had a hospital call, I'd usually be the first one there. So I was on that ambulance for a whole bunch of times. But I always made sure I was the driver because I didn't like the other part. So I usually got there first. And later, Mrs. What's her name? Mrs. Don't matter. But then anyhow, she'd call you sometimes later, and then that red light above the drugstore would light up, and you knew something was going on. Okay. And one of the biggest fires I remember when naturally the Fruita High School, when it burned down in 1934. And then the next biggest one I remember was when the Independent Lumber about burned down. And that was a mess. And I finally got off the fire department, which I made a mistake because now they get a pension. I was all volunteer. And they get a pretty good pension. But I was on there 17 years. I got off because of the fact that once the government got involved with that ambulance, the restrictions got too complicated. And I didn't want to, when you had to start taking the pulse and stay at and give all that stuff to the hospital before you could move. I remember the old man Carpenter got hit by a train, and we sat there until he died, and I think he would have lived if we'd have moved. But by the time we got the vital signs and all the things to the hospital, he died. And I thought, this ain't the place for me. So I got off, which was a bad mistake, because I would have, 3 more years, I'd have got a pension.
What were some of your favorite places?
Okay, the favorite places. The favorite places at that time, there used to be a baseball field over there behind the Methodist church. And we used to play baseball there. And then we played basketball in the alleys, which uh, once in a while you could really get first class and be able to go over to the Army, which they had basketball. It was a basketball floor. And I think when the high school burned down, that's where they played sports in that gym. It was a nice gym. It had a balcony in it, and I remember one thing I'll never forget. As I got older, when a guy by the name of Jim Etzler, he was a character, and he fell out of that, and it had a balcony. He fell down to the ground and just got up and dusted himself off, and we thought God he was about to kill him, but it didn't. I'll never forget that. Another time, Jake Steele he was kind of a big kid and ornery. He chopped a hole through James's roof when old Jake Steele was working in a car and fell through the roof. I never forgot that. And then one time his dad made him a little scooter, which Jake Steele had made. And I remember when he got it started and he took off, and Burl Essler was trying to catch him going around the park. Another thing I'll never forget is when Milt Taylor used to be work at the mortuary, and if you knew somebody very well, he'd get drunk, and if you didn't know him, well, he's pretty good. Well, he was a good mortician, but I remember when he got drunk and wrecked the ambulance, so they didn't have an ambulance, so they had to use the fire department's ambulance. So who did they give? Me, and I can remember. I can remember him. One of the reasons they did that is because him and Herb Johnson was at that time was retired, and one time they had a body in the back of a pickup going around the park, and the head was hanging out of the pickup, and everybody started griping. So that's when they got me again to go get our ambulance, and I'd have to make them calls with him, and I didn't like that very well, especially when they died. So anyhow, I did that. I have to stop the rest of it, okay?
Let me
Worst coal strikes it's ever been. And one of his brothers, it was so bad that they were killing people. And the coal miners were all on strike, I think 15,000 coal miners in Walsenburg, Levita, Alamosa, all. At that time, everybody were coal miners. And he was 22 years old in 1912 or 1913-14 strike. And the Ludlow massacres were Rockefeller owned all the CF&I, which is Colorado Fuel and Iron, and all the coal miners a lot of the coal miners were living in houses owned by him. And when they went on strike, he kicked them out of their houses. They also didn't get paid money; they got paid scrip. And so the miners went on strike, and their families were kicked out of their houses. So they went to Ludlow, and which Rockefeller dug the camps and killed women and kids. And one of my uncles, which is in the internet now, was the one that went to Washington, D.C., and they got a hold of the president and brought the United States Army here to stop the strike. At that time, Rockefeller always tried to get the amens his kids did, but it never did happen. That's probably the reason. They probably had to qualify people to be the president, but that was one of the things that stopped them. Nobody has forgot the Ludlow massacre. So my dad then, in 1922, moved to Fruita, him and my mom, and he bought a coal mine, which was individually owned them days. It wasn't a bunch of coal miners. So he opened a coal mine it was Garvey, and I think Tom Denton he hired him, he was a kid then, and he got down where they'd run out of coal, and then he opened the Coal Gulch mine, and he owned that. That's where you singly went into that coal mine. He drove back in there 5 miles, and did the coal mine the hard way. I mean, and then he had a chute. He lived there all week when we come home on Saturday and Sunday, especially when I was going to school. And he had scales. You had to have scales. You had to have a chute to cook the coal, which was divided into lump, nut, and pea coal. and he lived in an old cabin that he had built out of the railroad ties from the Unit Railroad, and dirt floor. I remember that, and then me and my mom in the summertime would go out there and live out there when he was running the coal mine. My mom would weigh all the people coming in for coal. And he also was telling me he can remember back when he first come there, he could in the wintertime you could hear them horses bringing their team and wagon to come and get a load of coal, and then he'd have to put them up all night because that was a one-day job. And then the Ruby Lee Reservoir was built about that time, which later became Gar Mesa. And the Ruby Lee Reservoir was about 2 miles from where his coal mine was. And we used to go swimming in the Ruby Lee, and that was one big pond at that time. I don't think it was quite as big as the Mac Reservoir, but pretty close. And it was deep, and what was owned by one of the grandsons of Quaker Oats, and I guess he was kind of wild, and that's one of the reasons they moved him here, and he raised like some, Gar Mesa had a grade school, and I can remember the merry-go-round because I could get out there and play on it when I was little, and all of that was, and then like on the hillside there, they dug in, and they had big old cisterns right before you go on that road, but I could show you where. But anyhow, the cisterns were above, and they'd fill them full of water, so you had running water in the town of Gar Mesa. They raised hogs in one part of it, and then the rest of them was all apple trees from that place where the Gar Mesa is now, a history place. And they had apple trees from there to the Highline Canal. And then that's the reason the Ruby Lee Reservoir was built, and they got the water coming down from the top of the mountain. But eventually the sand got so bad that that's the reason the Ruby Lee Reservoir was closed. Okay, and now once in a while, like last year, it did have water in it, but nothing like what it was. Okay, but I can remember, and then kids used to, when I was also, it was big enough you could ice skate on, and we swam in it. You know, it was a huge reservoir, and then he was a certified. My dad was a certified coal miner because you had the papers, and when he was, in other words, he was qualified to be a superintendent. And then he opened a coal mine over on Hunter Canyon, and since he was papered, there was 5 coal mines there, and he was one of them kind of guys that had the papers that at that time they started putting a few laws that you had to check a coal mine before anybody else could go in. And then people during the Depression, they used to pay him $1 a day for a signature. 5 different coal mines in that, like Hunter Canyon. And Hunter Canyon was one of the mines was owned by Marnelli, and later become Patterson's. The Bittmeyer brothers, and then the next one was the Hidden Treasure. And there was a coal mine on each side. One was number 1 and one was number 2. They quit the one on number 1, and my dad later reopened it. And then he decided to go to work for the guy on there. I can remember they used donkeys to pull the coal out of the coal mine, and anyhow, I can remember they had a donkey, and that donkey used to come up when I was once in a while I was going to be a cook. I wasn't very old. I'd be frying potatoes on there, peeling potatoes, and that goofy donkey, he didn't have no pen for me because he wouldn't leave, and he'd stick his head, open the door and stick his head in there and start begging for potato peelings. And then if you wanted to ride him, you had to pull him to where he was going to go, but when you were ready to come home, boy, you really get a horseback ride all the way. But you better be ready to hang on when you got to that coal mine, because that's where he's going. And he'd run, do whatever you wanted on the way back, but you had to walk him to where he was going. And then the Hunter mine was there, and then the McGinley mine, which was owned by Ernest Hicks. And then Ernest Hicks ended up buying the Hidden Treasure. My dad went to work for him for, I think, 10 years. I guess he was hard to get along with. My dad got along with him great. And he worked for him for 10 years, and then Dr. Orr told him he's going to have to get out of them coal mines. So he became the janitor of the Fruita Grade School for quite a long time, 18 years. But at the latter part, he was the head janitor of the high school and the new junior high at that time. And and uh, and then when I don't get in my military career yet, but I better stop and think. Okay, am I doing?
Did your family experience any significant events related to the town's development?
My dad was not interested. He just wasn't involved in politics in any way. Oh, yes, he was a one. Ray Hayes used to be the street commissioner, and the town was jealous of him because he was running the water department and the street. So they tried to get a mayor who would kick him out. And they asked my dad to run, and he said he wouldn't run against Ray Hayes. And anyhow, it turned out they didn't win either, because he remained on the same job until he retired. You know, I don't remember him or not. Well, yeah, he lived down the street from you.
Are there any stories or legends about the town's founding or early years that you would like to share?
Well, I can name you the first person born in Fruita was probably Jimmy Nichols, and his house was right by the town hall now, first house. And his son was a band director in 1938, and Fruita placed that there used to be a trophy there that they placed in the nation for his ability to run a high school band. And pretty near every kid in 1938 that was in high school was in the band. And then later on, like I name you a bunch of men and a lot of women, and they were all musicians, and they used to play in the bands. Like, my dance hall had, all them guys were actually students of his, which was Leland Bunniger, Wayne Beatty, there was a bunch of them. But anyhow, that was one of the bands. And then they become the Melody Maids. That was the Loma Dance Hall, which everybody went to on Saturday night. The dance started at 10 till 2. And anybody that was drinking had to drink out of their car because, and at that time, there was no dance halls in Grand Junction, or you couldn't. So they had dance halls. And one of them was a Pico Pica, a mile away. Loma is the one we went to. And then as kids, well, we lie about our age. You go down to what they call Big Mac and Little Mac. And Big Mac was Harold's Desert Inn, or Harold's Desert Inn. And the reason it was called Harold's Desert Inn is the parents of Harold bought it, and they received the money that they got for when he was killed in an accident in World War II. So, and later on, it became a strip joint. But that was Big Mac. And then you had Little Mac, which was run by the Mungers, and that's where all the kids went because it was a 3-2 joint. And at that time, they didn't have a lot of regulations, so yeah, everybody was 18. It might not be 18, but that was good enough. So that's where all of us kids went on Sunday. A lot of us did. And then on Saturday, we probably all went to the Loma Dance Hall, which was a big dance hall at that time, and still there's community hall now. And that was one of the entertainments we did. And then plus everybody went to the movies, which at that time was first owned by a person by the name of Frazier's, and later sold to Mr. Walker, which was Walker's then. I'll never forget this. He bought it, and they used to complain about the seats and all. He got all these getting all new seats. Well, it went on about 6 months. The seats weren't here, but we was going to have them pretty quick. And so as a dumb wild kid, I was down in Cleveland one day, and there was a billy goat there on a chain. So I got that billy goat and turned him loose in that theater. Yeah, man, all the people started yelling and didn't like that too well. Well, anyhow, old Tom Wilson happened to be the night marshal there, so he got me and handcuffed me to the bike rack outside so everybody could see who did it. I'll never forget that. So they didn't let me go to the movies. I was getting a little older by then, so. And then they finally got the seats. and I don't really would. The movie changed like 3 times a week. It was only 15 or 20 cents to go to the movies then, and popcorn was a nickel a bag. You know, a lot of difference in the way theaters were, and they changed all the movies 3 times a week, and pretty near every kid in town went to the movies at that time, and Walker's owned it probably till I don't know, in the 50s somewhere, you know. And then it was bought later, but that's about the time movies started going out, so they had drive-ins. So a lot of the kids went to drive-ins every different things, and there was probably 3 drive-ins in Grand Junction. Then there was a rocket between Fruita and Grand Junction, and a guy Carlucci used to run the projector, and but anyhow, that was one of the things we did for entertainment. And then also, when I was in the Boy Scouts, well, we'd go there and we'd get the Boy Scouts would meet there every whatever the dates were, and I went on. I become an Eagle Scout, and I made one of them big one, like maybe 1,000 kids. They'd pick up, and we'd all go to a certain place. Which at the time I was in, I had the little pen where I went 2 years. A friend of mine by the name of Joe Garcia, and he was 3 years older than I, and he probably had a lot to do with the way I was because he was 3 years older, and I learned how to play pool in the pool hall naturally, so I was pretty young, and I got to think. So at that time, the Boy Scouts. Oh, and then we'd go, always got the gym at the old Fruita Army, which had a basketball floor, and we'd play dodgeball and basketball and different sports. And the scoutmaster was Reverend Shaftstall, which was a preacher at the Baptist church at that time. And he was really a good scoutmaster. Most of the kids were at that age were in the Boy Scouts. And then I think I finally got up to 21 or 20 merit badges, and then I decided to go for the Boy Scouts. So by that time I was probably in high school. And then I learned how to play pool pretty good. So I learned how to play pool when I was like 9 years old. And Tex Violet at that time owned the pool hall, which was now what is in there? You know what's in there now? Do you remember where the pool hall was? Be the third building.
Which side? Which side of the street?
North side.
It's a restaurant now.
Yes. Well, Tex Violet had the pool ball then, and he owned it for quite a few years, all mine. And they used to have an old potbelly stove there, and us kids, we all got to play with pretty good pool players. In fact, we'd play for money. And I would be, every night we'd be there. So, and at that time I was scared of the dark all my life. So I'd run from street light to street light to get home at about 4 blocks. I remember one time, and on Apple Street, they didn't have a street light. And I hit that barn, went around, and I run through my mom happened to have the screen door locked, and I run through the screen door. And that's how I think it had a lot to do with how come I was fast in track, because I could flat ass run, boy. And it was dark. I'd run from street light to street light, and then rest a minute, and then take off to the next street light. I mean, I could move it too. And I was actually scared the whole time. I remember I decided my dad was working at the coal mine, and I was going to ride my bicycle. Well, I was always tearing that damn bicycle apart, and anyhow, I forgot to oil the front hub. So I decided I was going to go up and come home with my dad from the coal mine on Friday night. So I had to ride my bicycle 15 miles to the Hidden Treasure coal mine. So I take off, and since I didn't oil that dang wheel, the front hub started freezing up, and I'd have to get out and loosen a bolt so the wheel would turn. Well, I got past the Highline Canal and it started getting dark, and here I am scared to death of the dark, you know. And I'm out there, and boy, I was crying by pretty heavy by then. And boy, I finally got to the point where I'd load that bicycle and was trying to run with that bicycle on my shoulder. But about that time, my dad happened to show up. He knew I was scared of the dark, so he picked me up. Oh, boy, was I glad to see him. And he knew that I was coming. And I thought, boy, oh boy, I was scared to death. And the coyotes started howling. Boy, I was scared. Boy, I was really spooked then.
How has Fruita changed over the years?
Huh?
Oh, yes.
Yeah, well, and then I remember my dad only owned, he didn't like to drive a car. That's one thing he did not like. So he'd walk every place. Well, he only owned 3 cars that I know of. One was a 28 Durant, a 28 Chevy, and a 34 Plymouth. And in 1944, when he became the janitor at the grade school, he never drove again. It was 1944. He'd walk every place. He'd walk to Junction. And apparently he must like to walk, but I know that one time when he was young, when he lived in Levita, I remember he walked to Levita to Walsenburg to pay his mom's bills, because he was the last one out of about 8 brothers that they were all coal miners, and he was the youngest, so he stayed with his mother until she died. And his dad apparently was pretty mean, and then he also told me that one of the most experiences he remembers, that his dad was mean to his mother, so he didn't think too much of his dad. But anyhow, apparently, and his oldest brother was the sheriff of Warfano County when the Ludlow massacre took place. So at one time he had all his brothers in jail because he was afraid they were going to get shot. And so, let's see. Well, anyhow, so he would walk from Levita to Walsenburg and back and pay all of his bills. I remember he told that he walked and paid all his brother's bills, and he had 25 cents left. So he kept 25 cents, and I don't remember what the total amount was at the time, but he thought that was enough. So that's when times apparently were pretty tough. That would have been in 1921 probably, because he moved to Florida in 22. He got married in 22 also. And then he moved to Fruita, and he bought a place over there where Waddell's butcher shop was, and he had 10 acres. And my mother said he always wanted to be a farmer. He said, well, he wasn't a very good farmer because he liked to get up real early in the morning, and he said he watered everything to where he just wasn't a good farmer, period, you know. He worked himself to death, and he just stayed with coal mining. And being adopted, I think I had the greatest parents that anybody could possibly have. And people used to ask me if I ever looked up my biological family, and I said, no. Why would I do that when I have the best parents in the world? So I didn't do it, you know, and I've had chances to, and I know apparently, I knew my name, and I pretty well know who they are, and they're very wealthy, but I wasn't interested. And I remember one time they tried to talk me into go and see it, and I said, no, I ain't going. I don't want to know. I don't want to visit anybody. It might cause a bunch of problems. And I'm sure I have brothers and sisters, and I was told that one of them looked a little bit like me, and I still wasn't interested. And I could name the family, but I just not, you know. I could tell you that my last name, I knew that the mother was 20 years old when I was born. And I feel that it probably, or maybe younger, I don't remember now, but anyhow, I'm sure that at that time, if you had a baby and you were single, it was pretty embarrassing. So I think that's the reason that I was adopted. In other words, you know, they used to take kids and run them out of town because they didn't want anybody to know that you were pregnant. And that used to be one of the ways they'd do it. And it so happens that I know of that particular family because it's a pretty famous family. And the other problem I got, I knew where I was born. I thought I was born, but it turned out that ain't where I was born, but that's where they lived. And so naturally, when I went in the United States Army, I put down Durango, Colorado. And later, when I was 21 years old and I come back, no, well, I knew I was adopted the whole time I was a kid. And when I be, when I come back out of the Army, my mom apparently got the real, uh, what do you call it, birth certificate. And that's when I found out that I knew that my name all the time, what it was. But also it said how much I weighed when I was born, and and uh, and which is kind of unusual on my birth certificate. It says that I am a illegitimate child. It says that on my birth certificate.
Wow.
And the name that named the father, whoever she thought it was apparently, and her. And what else did it say? I don't know. I got it, but I could have checked it out. I was never interested, and I knew that where the family lived in Durango.
George, to you, what makes Fruita unique?
Well, I think food is unique because they have a bunch of farmers and they're all. Uh, at the time when I was growing up, everybody was poor, so everybody uh, got together with entertainment themselves. It wouldn't be like we used to hike when I was a kid across the river. A bunch of kids that would hike. The times were totally different. Said we'd hike up Coatles Canyon, Devil's Canyon. Also, I remember Coatles Canyon, which is a place where there was a guy called Coatles that thought it was a gold mine, and he dove a big face in the granite of Coatles Canyon, which is his first canyon past the Bang Canyon now. And he opened a mine, and he had cables running there, and that mine that he opened, it goes right through the granite, right straight in the ground, and I don't think he ever found gold, but the only story I got was uh, Irving Beard's wife, which was one of the early pioneer women, and she knew him, and he had a cabin built there at the beginning of Coatles Canyon, but he got so crazy that anybody tried to go up Coatles Canyon, he'd shoot him or shoot at him, and so they finally put him in the insane asylum. Go. Anyhow, Coatles Canyon was not too far to hike. A lot of people don't know about it, but it's still there, and as kids we'd hike there, and then we'd hike to that big red rock that you might see when you look over the monument. I think every kid in town had initials on that rock. And what do we call that? I can't remember what we called it, but it's only big red rock when you look over that way. And then we'd hike Devil's Canyon. But we'd hiked every week. We didn't have no money, so we just hiked. And also, one of the things I really remember during the time when I was growing up, families would come to Fruita. They really liked Fruita, and they didn't have any money, so one of the families was. I'll think of the name here. It don't matter who it is, but anyhow, they were a family that had a boy about my age, and they parked a trailer on the ditch bank where the old Fruita High School used to be, and they lived in that across that ditch bank for about 3 years, and their trailer straddled the ditch bank, and that's where they washed their dishes out of the ditch. And then Tom Denton, the Denton kids, they had a whole flock of kids, and they ended up building the same thing across over there by where we lived. And Ed Denton was my age, and this cabin was built out of ties, and one of the ties fell down and broke his leg. And we started first grade together, but he couldn't finish because he broke his leg. And later on, they put a silver plate in it, and he ended up busting it later when he was 50 or 60 years old, and they had to redo it. But anyhow, I remember they lived on that ditch bank, and I remember they washed their dishes in the summertime out of the ditch, And so times apparently were a lot tougher than than I thought. But my parents, uh, I never did hurt for anything. I mean, never. And I was actually the uh, was probably the most spoiled kid in town and the most loved because I just couldn't do nothing wrong as far as my parents were concerned. And so I was very fortunate to be adopted on my adoption. Uh, my mother was really religious, very, very religious, and but she never did try to control me with her religion, which she could have done. And then I went to Mesa College, then I went to BYU, and I knew she was going so uphill when I went to BYU, but she never did question me. If I do anything wrong, she'd put a scripture of the Bible in my billfold. And sometimes that helps, sometimes it wouldn't, you know. But anyhow, I remember that boy was pretty wild, you know. But anyhow, I can remember some of the things I did that were pretty bad, you know. I don't know if anybody remembers where the Caravan used to be in Grand Junction on First Street, and they used to have a band there, and it was called the Monkey Bar because they had monkeys behind the bar. But I was older then, and Pauline Haller had a horse, and I pulled up there one day, and we'd all been drinking a little bit, and I wanted to take that horse in there. And I got him in the door, and the band fired up, and thank God he turned around and ran out the door. But if he had got loose in there, I don't know what had happened. But anyhow, I can remember that. Everybody thought it was crazy, and we were crazy. Also remember, I worked in the mines that I liked the mines, working mines. I worked with my dad in the coal mine for a year, maybe 2 years, and I liked the work. But by then he quit that, so I went to after high school. One of my best friends, his parents, when we were seniors, they moved to California, and he wanted to play football, so he lived with us. So we were Lefty Roberts, and we turned into be really great friends. We went to Minern and got a job at Battle Mountain in the hard rock mine, which was one of the biggest mines in the United States as that kind of a mine. I worked there about 3 or 4 years, and if you were white, you really got a lot of benefits. You know, in other words, anything come up that was, if I'd have stayed there, I'd probably got a college education. Joe Beerscheid, I had a lot of kids going to work there, and Joe Beerscheid became the mine superintendent later. And then he went to Utah, and I won't go into the detail, but he ended up dying from going to Mexico and drinking water or something. But he was married to Jackie Beerscheid, or Jackie Weir. One of the things that we didn't have when I was in high school. Oh, another thing, when I was in high school, I played sports. So I lettered as a freshman in track, and then I played basketball and football. I was a starter on both sports, and the captain of the basketball team and captain of the track team. But what was I going to say? But anyhow, when I was in high school, we never had very good coaches. And in 1947, I was a junior, and we got a new coach, which ended up being a good coach. But also, for the sports, that particular year, we had, since that was right after World War II, we had 4 veterans come back that were still young enough to play football and basketball. One was Dale Patterson, which was like 6'4", Carlisle Hoover, which was pretty good size, Junior Abeda, and Harley Greer. And so anyhow, I remember everybody thought, boy, them guys they had to be under 20, I think. I don't remember. They could be 20, I think. I can't remember. But anyhow, we played rifle that year, and we won. And all the Fruita people went to the game. Well, that was right after World War II. Well, they stayed and tore the goalpost down at rifle. Well, about 15 of them ended up in the hospital because the rifle didn't appreciate that too well. So we had to be escorted out of the game after we won by police. And for 2 years, Fruita sports were took into rifle by police cars. all my years. But anyhow, we ended up having to forfeit that game because of Junior Beta being too old. And then we didn't win the conference, and I think Hotchkiss did. But anyhow, make a long story short, we probably would have, and I think they won the state. I think we would have probably did good. But the only thing that was bad about them, the coach we had, he was messing around with them, some of them girls, I think, and he was about as young as them players because he'd just been discharged out of the Navy also, but he was a little older than them. So you had a problem with them older guys drinking too, you know. Because Dale Patterson ended up his junior year with playing for Mesa College, and on my baccalaureate night, somebody said, "Did you hear Dale Patterson committed suicide?" I said, "No." Well, they said he just did. Why? Nobody knows. I don't know why, but he was about 6'4", and I remember he was so tall they didn't have a casket big enough for him, so they laid him on a bed.
Phil,
You know.
how has the past in Fruita shaped the present?
How's the past affected me?
How's it affected the present right now as to the town of Fruita?
Well, I think the older generation was closer than they are now. But Fruita is still a pretty close-knit town, and I think they always will be. And usually you have a lot of people coming in from other states. They may want to try and they moved away from someplace they didn't like, and then they tried to change it back to what it was. Whether they lived, they shouldn't have left to begin with. So, but anyhow, as a whole, I think they're all happy, and I think they stay here. And they're very fortunate they happen to come here with little money so they could buy stuff. My dad bought his house in Fruita. He gave $600 for it, and it sold for 400. There's like 200,000 here not too long ago, and he bought it for $600. And by 1930, he couldn't pay the taxes on it. And when 1937 come along, since he was a World War I veteran, they didn't list his house. In them days, they started listing and selling your house, your property. But if you was a veteran, they wouldn't sell your house or didn't list it. And he couldn't pay the taxes, and they were only $80 a year. And then in 1938, he got up the taxes.
What are your hopes for the future of Fruita?
Well, I think my hope is that morals get a little stronger. A lot of people have lost their morals, I think, and maybe I'm not a real religious person, but I think maybe they need to start being a little bit more religious. And I think the hope for Fruita, I think, is still on that page more so than they are in the city. So therefore, if you're brought up and raised in Fruita, I think you're probably raised in one of the best communities there is, and I think it'll continue.
What aspects of its history should be preserved?
Like, there's a lot of people out in that cemetery that I respect and know all the history about them. I can name you first high school football player who was killed in Fruita, and he was killed going to college at Colorado College, and he held a lot of records. And his name was Pickens. He died in 1928. I know the history of Charlie Glass, which I met when I was 7 years old. I remember him, and I think he was hired by Turner's. I can name the families, Tomlinson's. But anyhow, actually he was brought here, and he was kind of a person that was the cattlemen back in them days, which is now better. The cattlemen and sheep people get along, but back in them days they didn't get along. And I think the people in Fruita get along better than most people, and I think it'll continue.
Do you have any other stories you'd like to share with us?
I do remember Charlie Glass, barely. But I thought, I'd never seen a black person before, but I knew that all the kids liked him. He was real good with kids. He was killed in a car wreck at the state line, which he happened to be with a bunch of Basques and got to drinking, and they also say there was probably a bullet hole in him. And he, I don't know if you know things about Tom Horn. Have you ever heard of him? Basically he's kind of under that order, but not that bad. But I do know that I knew he was real friendly. He liked kids, and I knew that the reason he come to Fruita, I knew that apparently when he was a kid they cut his dad's head off and drug it through town. That's what I was told. So he had pretty bad memories about that. I guess you know the story about him when they threw him in jail for dog leash law, had the dog leash law, and so they arrested him. And he was like 80-some years old, because I knew him real well. And so he went to court and they fined him $25. And he said, then they said, you pay at the office. He said, I ain't paying. And they said, well, you have to go to jail. He said, I'm going to jail. And I remember this distinctly, that old jail used to be by there where the armory was. And man, they started worried about him having a heart attack, and he'd go set it out, him and the dog. So they had to take him down to Mrs. Archibald's to feed him at the Fruita Cafe. And pretty soon they thought, well, we got to do something. And then leave the jail door open so he could go home. Well, he wouldn't go home. So he served the whole 30 days out, and they had to feed him. And there was a lot. And he was just as happy as a lark, But that was Leif Young.
George, we would like to extend our thanks to you for allowing us into your home and spending time with us and sharing stories and history.